Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
It's time for Positively Kansas. Coming up, 100 years old and still plugging along. Find out what makes this classic car one of the rarest in the world and why it's an important piece of Kansas history. Also, heavy hitters in the weather biz come to town to prepare for another year of danger and drama from the sky. Learn about plans to make Wichita ground zero for the important and exciting world of storm chasing. Plus, business is blowing up for this Butler County teen. Learn about his twisted formula for success. I'm Sierra Scott. A half hour of information and inspiration is coming your way. Positively Kansas starts right now. Before Wichita took flight as the air capital of the world, it was blazing a trail in the auto industry. J.J. Jones was giving Henry Ford a run for his money with a big and powerful car he called the Jones 6. The brand is all but forgotten now, but Jim Grayway tracked down the only person in Wichita who still has one and actually drives it. And he learned all about this nearly forgotten piece of Wichita history.
The tank is full of gasoline, I've bought a quart of oil.
Imagine the year is 1919. If you were the one behind the wheel, you'd be the bee's knees because you'd be driving a car that was the cat's pajamas.
Johnny O'Connor bought an automobile. He took his sweetheart for a ride one Sunday.
The Jones 6 was a humdinger of an automobile back in the day. You'd see a lot of them on the streets of Wichita because this is where they were built. But now, 100 years later, there's only one still rumbling along the city streets. And it's owned by Phil Knighton.
Out here, a let's say 14 Model T Ford four-cylinder would go 35 miles an hour. But we had long, straight stretches of road, and you could go faster. So the six-cylinder car, this would go 60 miles an hour.
Powerful and comfortable for the time, the Jones 6 cars started rolling out of the factory in North Wichita in 1914. Autos were an exciting new thing, and the Jones Auto Company was the talk of the town. Makes sense if you ask history prof. Jay Price.
In the turn of the century, the automobile is sort of this miracle magic alternative. And there is a cultural shift that's taking place. And so Jones is very much tapping into this.
So the Iron Monster, cheered and jeered, loved and despised, cut a swath across rural America. And the rural America of trackless plains, impassable roads, and isolated farms was never again the same.
But this was not uncommon for cities across the country to have small upstart auto companies.
America Online introduces new version 4.0.
Similar to the dot-com boom at the end of the century, the automobile boom at the beginning of the century inspired entrepreneurs everywhere to jump on the bandwagon.
Back in 1916, cars came in every conceivable shape and size. There were 140 different U.S. manufacturers then.
By the time Jones was building cars in Wichita, the Smith Automobile Company in Topeka had already come and gone. So had the Clawfley Automobile Company in Cherry Vale and the Sellers Motor Car Company in Hutchinson.
Industries always start small and local. They start with individuals tinkering with ideas, and then they form small companies, and then those companies grow, and eventually there's a culling, and rival companies get taken out, and then the ones that remain continue to grow and expand and so forth.
Jones was by far Kansas's most successful car company, at one point operating around the clock with hundreds of workers turning out 25 cars a week.
It's just part of the Wichita story. You look at Pizza Hut, you look at various other companies, Coleman, that produced here. They just had that spirit of entrepreneurship, and Jones was right in there.
Knighton not only owns the only Jones 6 on Wichita streets, but as a young car buff in the 1960s, he wrote the definitive history of the company when he was a young college student at Wichita State.
I started doing research for my paper and found nothing. Nothing in the public library, nothing in the university's library.
But he was able to track down one of the company's last living employees. Carl Evans was in his 80s at that time, having built and raced cars back in those early days.
He said, "Come on over and I'll tell you," because I was his right-hand man through the whole project. And he told the whole Jones story.
And that was a story of high hopes. In 1914, Knighton says a Jones 6 was a bargain compared to a cheap little Ford Model T.
Basically, for $195 more, you got a car that goes 60 miles an hour, was much bigger, more powerful, more comfortable, and that was his appeal. But the guns of August changed all of that.
World War I threw a wrench into everything for companies like Jones that purchased most of their parts from other manufacturers.
The components were suddenly in demand. We were selling to the Germans, we were selling to the British, we were selling to the French and the other belligerents in World War I before we got involved. And the competition for these components for military trucks and vehicles were so similar to what was going into assembled cars like the Jones. The price tripled.
Then, to add insult to injury, a massive fire destroyed the Jones factory in 1920. Even before the embers cooled, the rebuilding effort was underway, but by the time the factory was rebuilt, the company was deep in debt and went bankrupt. After turning out 3,000 high-quality cars, the whole thing was kaput. Dr. Price says even without the fire, the Jones Company was facing a very bumpy road ahead.
I think there were a lot of factors that worked against Jones.
Price says the larger automobile makers like Ford squeezed out the small upstarts with their ability to build lots of cars more efficiently. Meanwhile, the big boys also had the resources to advertise and distribute nationwide and develop new technology as customers started demanding more. It was some 30 years after doing the research that Knighton came across a man from Texas who owned this Jones 6.
He says, "Oh, you're from Wichita," looking at my business card. "I've got a car that was built in Wichita and I'd like to get rid of it." Well, I about had a heart attack right there.
Knighton bought it, spiffed it up, and got it running. This 1919 model is one of only 8 Jones automobiles known to exist in the world. There is one that doesn't run inside the Sedgwick County Historical Museum, but this is the only Jones 6 you'll see cruising along the streets of the city where it was built 100 years ago. Nobody then could have imagined the twists and turns of the road ahead.
Make a car open, make a car please, no matter how you are far. In daylight or twilight, in starlight or skylight all on. Take a car.
Phil Knighton says he knows a man in Tennessee who owns 4 perfectly preserved Jones 6s. And that man, he says, would like to donate those cars to the city of Wichita on the condition that the city put them on permanent public display. We'll let you know what happens. In Wichita, I'm Jim Grayway for Positively Kansas.
In case you're wondering, the Jones Car Factory is located on 37th Street North, where the Coleman Company sits now. Back in the day, Clyde Cessna rented out part of the Jones factory. That's where he started building airplanes as the cars were coming off the assembly line. Now an update to a story we brought you a while back. You may remember little wrestling dynamo Presley Beard. She's fearless, defeating boys twice her size. But now a new rule has left Presley and other girl wrestlers feeling they are inferior to boys in the ring. Meanwhile, others say the rule will help grow female wrestling in our state. Anthony Powell brings us both sides.
Presley Beard's passion for wrestling remains every bit as strong today as when we first brought you her story, and she revealed the goals she thinks about every time she steps in the ring.
I want to go to the Olympics.
All right. And you're going to keep working hard to get there, right?
Yeah.
Presley and her mom credit a lot of her success to the confidence she has gained by wrestling boys.
My coach teaches me and he makes me be stronger so I can and have better technique so I can beat boys.
And she's defeated a lot of boys, including victories at the most prestigious tournament of all, the state championships held every year in Topeka. But in the fall of 2018, the governing body that oversees wrestling in Kansas voted that girls would no longer be able to wrestle boys at both state tournament qualifying matches or the state tournament itself. The ruling stunned Presley and her mom.
It's basically a smack in the face. It's made me reality check a lot of things too. It's imprisoning.
Mad because the girls, they're easy for me, but the boys, they make me better.
Macy says the ruling feels like something from years ago when girls were told they were inferior to boys in sports and other areas.
It feels like we stepped back into time. It feels like we went back in the timeline. I'm like, I would have never in a million years thought that this would happen. I mean, I'm just floored by it, still just baffled by it.
Ever since learning that girls will no longer be able to wrestle boys at the qualifying and state tournaments, Tristan Macy says she's been searching for answers. We sat down with Mike Juby, who's head of USA Wrestling Kansas, and he clarified why the rule was implemented.
This is a terrific sport. We want girls to become more involved in it.
Juby insists that the rule was written with only one thought in mind: encourage more girls to get into wrestling so that there will be enough female wrestlers to field girls-only teams at both the middle and high school levels in Kansas. Something that will hopefully happen in the next few years.
Women's wrestling is becoming a very big thing. We have, I think, 14 states in the nation that recognize women's wrestling as a separate high school sport. There is women's wrestling in college now.
Juby says the research his organization did indicated that most girls are intimidated by wrestling boys, especially at such a prestigious event as the state tournament. And it was feared that being in that kind of spotlight and losing might make many girls quit the sport.
The girls now have their own state tournament as part of the big extravaganza that the boys' state tournament is.
Presley and her mom, though, remain steadfast in their belief that
Girls should wrestle boys because boys can make them better wrestlers and they can make girls stronger.
By not letting them, it's not giving them an equal opportunity to compete at the highest level, and that's available to them in our state.
Mike Juby is sympathetic to their frustrations, but says competing against girls now at a high-level competition like the state tournament will better prepare Presley for the future when she will only be wrestling her own sex.
Girls are understandably uncomfortable about going out and wrestling with boys, especially as they get older. They recognize that this doesn't feel fair.
Despite the difference in opinion, both sides agree that wrestling for both Kansas girls and boys is growing in popularity, and that something like girls-only teams in middle and high schools, which once seemed like a remote possibility, is now close to being a reality. For Positively Kansas, I'm Anthony Powell.
Girls are still allowed to wrestle boys in tournaments other than state championship qualifying matches and the state tournament itself. Presley and her mom say they will use that opportunity to continue growing stronger and better as Presley continues to set her sights on the Olympics. A tornado in Hayesville in 1999 killed 6 people and damaged 150 homes. Sadly, it's just one of many terrible storms that have wrought death and destruction in Kansas. So what better place to have the world's largest gathering of storm chasers and meteorologists? Anthony Powell reports on the ChaserCon convention that recently stormed into Wichita.
Numerous deadly and highly destructive tornadoes are part of Kansas history. Udall, 1955. An EF5 strikes in the dark of night, killing 87, 20% of the town's population. 11 years later in Topeka, 17 people lost their lives in another F5 monster. The same number of lives were taken in 1991 when an F5 ripped through southeast Wichita and eventually into Andover.
Oh my gosh, that was huge!
And in 2007, darkness would bring terror to Greensburg.
Down there we have a tornado shelter. You see it goes underground. It's a good thing because this is what it looks like above ground.
As a nearly 2-mile wide EF5 wedge destroyed nearly all of the town and killed 11 residents. These are just some of the horrifying twisters that have struck Kansas.
With our state being home to some of the most powerful tornadoes in U.S. history, what better place to come for some more detailed information about the volatile Kansas weather than the 2019 annual Storm Chaser Convention held for the first time in Wichita.
Still producing a violent tornado, and toward the end, roping out.
The Storm Chaser Convention, or ChaserCon as it is known, brought chasers and meteorologists from around the country to talk about the latest weather trends, how to stay safe when chasing, and other topics. Some big names were here.
Was 301 miles per hour, plus or minus about 20 miles per hour.
Including the Weather Channel's severe weather expert, Dr. Greg Forbes, who is well aware of our state's deadly tornado history.
The Topeka tornado is a famous one in weather history, so certainly Kansas can get some very destructive, very deadly tornadoes. And has had that happen in the past.
Meanwhile, for locals who attended, the conference meant much more than talking about the weather.
Well, for decades, I've tried to get a meteorological conference to Wichita.
Well-known Wichita meteorologist Mike Smith led the effort to have ChaserCon held in the air capital for the first time. Smith says the conference gave Wichita invaluable exposure and a nice economic boost. KSN Chief Meteorologist Lisa Teachman, a Wichita area native, says the conference made her burst with pride.
ChaserCon's been primarily in Denver. One other time it was in Norman. This is the first time it's ever been in Wichita. And Wichita is in the severe weather Super Bowl of the whole entire world, so why not have it here?
Back inside the conference, what the future holds for Kansas and other states regarding tornadoes was also a hot topic.
I don't think we can say definitively anything about the future, and certainly not from one year to the next. These tornado outbreaks are predictable these days, maybe a week in advance.
But Dr. Forbes and other experts say one thing is for sure. Every spring and perhaps some falls, you'll see lots of chasers roaming the Sunflower State. And thanks to the ChaserCon conference, a lot more of them will be familiar with Wichita. For Positively Kansas, I'm Anthony Powell.
ChaserCon organizers say Wichita proved to be such a great location, it will definitely host the convention again. Meteorologists used to use balloons to predict the weather, but an Augusta teen is using balloons to entertain and create amazing art. Correspondent Anna Spencer pops in with this story from Butler County.
These aren't your typical classroom supplies, but Levi Harris isn't your typical college student.
There are actually several sizes of balloons also. These are called 260Qs. They also have 350s, 646s, and 160s.
This 19-year-old is a twister, a balloon artist. It's a craft he's honed since he was an 11-year-old kid, and now it's a growing business.
So we had some little kits that I guess my parents had ordered in because they were kind of trying to do stuff for their business. They own a petting zoo. And so one of them was a little balloon kit. It was kind of like what you'd find maybe at a party store or something like that. Had a small instruction manual with about 5 balloons in it. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. You know, you see clowns as a kid, get a balloon animal at a birthday party. So like, I'll try it. So I was going through the book and reading it, and I made some scary stuff at first. But I just kept going through all the balloons until I ran out and made them, and was practicing. Our dining room table was covered in balloons by the time I was done, and I kind of caught on to that. So then I was like, okay, you know, I might actually like to do this for fun, you know, like a little hobby.
From there, Levi's hobby took off. A few books, a twisting workshop, and several YouTube videos later, Levi has developed quite a following.
I do everything. So I've done countless birthday parties. I twist at Wichita River Festival every year. I've twisted at Crestview Country Club, at Chick-fil-A. Too many events to remember, honestly. But they're all pretty awesome.
From parties to festivals, Levi's creations are a hit for balloon lovers of all ages. Just look for the long lines. You'll find him there.
This is a 5-inch round from Qualitex. It is actually called a ladybug print. And so when you buy them, they have thousands of different printed balloons. They've got superhero faces, they've got princesses, they've got ladybugs, they've got like little smiley faces. And so these ones are perfect. See, they make a perfect little body for the ladybug. You can, you know, inflate it right around and draw them on, but that takes a lot more time, and I think that's very cute.
Pre-printed balloons are just one trick of the trade. An electric pump helps too. Levi wears a cutter on his hip, a useful tool for his quick designs. To keep up with demand, he makes sure he has a marker handy. And with an easy grip, he adds eyes and eyelashes to his creations.
Now, one of my biggest problems is I am no artist, so trying to make the Sharpie art look good can be tricky sometimes. But there's a nice little ladybug.
And he twists up another trick that parents will love.
Put that on just like that. And then put that on down there. And now it's a bracelet. You can wear it just like that. Would you like to wear it?
Cool. Sure.
A balloon bracelet. No more tears over lost or worse, popped balloon art. More than a job, it's a hobby he plans to continue.
When I get the time, you know, I try to get all the events on the weekends or at night in the evenings after class. And it does help offset, you know, the cost of tuition. What I'd like to do eventually is after I graduate from Friends University, I'd like to kind of have this be a weekend job and have maybe like a 9 to 5 during the weekdays and then do this during the weekends just for fun, you know. I like going to the birthday parties and making the kids happy.
And smiles are what twisting is all about. In Butler County, I'm Anna Spencer for Positively Kansas.
Levi is a Butler County Community College student majoring in cybersecurity. His business, called Twisted Fun Balloons, can be found on Facebook, where he books parties, festivals, and creates one-of-a-kind balloon centerpieces and pillars for all occasions. Now to this week's Kansas Wild Edge Report, where Mike Blair shows us how bugs help create beauty in the great outdoors.
Wildflowers are the glory of each growing season. Colorful and fruitful, they fill the land with beauty and food. They're always ready to occupy open niches with bountiful growth. They get important help from pollinators. Various insects and birds that feed on flowers are an important part of flower reproduction. Flowers have sweet nectar attractive to these feeders. Some visitors come solely for this high-energy drink, full of carbohydrates. Others, like bees, gather flower pollen for food. Pollen has essential proteins that are mixed into honey to help feed the hive. Bees have specialized hairs on their hind legs where pollen is stored and transported. When full, these are quite noticeable, containing the yellow or orange pollen grains. busy as a bee has meaning, since these and other feeders work tirelessly throughout their lives, moving from flower to flower. And this unwittingly helps wildflowers create healthy seeds. As insects feed and gather, pollen grains stick to their bodies. Pollen is the male gamete needed to fertilize the female flower structure. When a visitor moves to a similar flower, some pollen is brushed off where it helps the receiver plant reproduce. Genetically, this makes strong and vibrant seeds ready to grow for the next season. Butterflies and moths, though they don't actively gather pollen, are common accidental couriers in this process. Pollen dust rides on their bodies as they go. Here you can see pollen grains stuck to the butterfly's feeding tube. Butterflies and moths can travel and pollinate flowers over long distances in a day. Bees, wasps, beetles, even hummingbirds help wildflowers produce strong and healthy seed crops. It's another fascinating process that marks the Kansas outdoors. I'm Mike Blair for Positively Kansas.
Wow, what amazing photography. Mike will have another great story next time. Well, that's a wrap for this week. If you have a story idea, drop us a line or email the address positivelykansas@kpts.org. We hope you enjoyed the show and will join us again next week. I'm Sierra Scott. Thanks for watching.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas. Support also comes from viewers like you. Thank you.